Good evening, I'm Andrew Chang. Tonight, a scathing indictment of long-term care homes in Ontario.
That's shocking. And I think it's no surprise why COVID has gone through the entire home now.
Will what military personnel saw lead to real change?
I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Also tonight, a crackdown in Toronto's tow truck industry.
Level of greed that leads to criminality and violence.
The allegations go way past racing to an accident.
Words from Alberta's energy minister come under scrutiny.
And as hotels and restaurants get set to reopen,
it's really important that we don't make the environment feel like you're going into a hospital emergency room.
we've got a couple of tours lined up for you. This is The National.
We know the picture of death from this pandemic is dominated by long-term care. CBC News has linked 3 out of every 4 COVID-19 fatalities. That's nearly 5,000 lives to Canadian care homes. The situation so dire in Quebec and Ontario, the military came to help.
But now those soldiers have delivered a battlefield report from Ontario. Details so troubling, the Prime Minister said it triggered a torrent of emotions.
Of anger, of sadness, of frustration, of grief. It is extremely
troubling. The report
troubling.
covers 5 homes where soldiers on a mission of care and infection control described a devastating lack of both. Their words have jolted 2 levels of government to attention and perhaps action. David Common lays out what the soldiers saw and how their involvement made COVID-19 not just a crisis, but also a spotlight showing some stark flaws.
At least 77 residents have died inside Orchard Villa, more than any other care facility in Ontario. One of 5 homes the military is now sounding a dire and awful warning about. For June Morrison, whose dad died inside from COVID last month, a message to those with loved ones still inside.
You want to see the summer with them? Get them out. Don't leave them in there.
Why do you say that?
Shortage of staff, neglect, abuse, mistreatment. It's all in the report.
That report is 15 pages of detailed failures. At Hawthorne, little to no disinfection, forceful feeding causing audible choking and aspiration, residents crying for help over 2 hours without help. At Altamont, allegations of neglect and abuse by staff, residents bedbound for several weeks. And at Orchard Villa, cockroaches and flies present, inappropriate PPE use. Staff frequently failed to feed residents sitting up, thereby risking choking, even an incident that appears to have contributed to patient death.
There's going to be justice. There's going to be accountability.
That justice could include the police and coroner, says Ontario's premier, while rejecting that his government's decision to end unexpected proactive inspections had anything to do with where care homes are now at.
It's shocking that this can happen here in Canada.
No, we shouldn't be surprised by any of this.
Lawyer and elder advocate Jane Meadas says the province should already be aware, because many of these issues existed before COVID.
So I think what we're seeing is that really totally outside view of a system which is broken, and they're able to point out in a way that individual residents and individuals in homes haven't been able to do that.
Take, for instance, the military warning that Hawthorne Place only had 1 registered nurse for 200 residents, that Altamont often has only 1 personal support worker to do everything for 30 frail residents. Shocking, perhaps, but quite legal.
When I see things like not setting people up to feed them, not wearing PPE properly, that's shocking. And I think it's no surprise why COVID has gone through the entire home now.
So, David, do you have any sense that the conditions at any of the homes might have changed since the military started documenting them?
Well, in their own documents, the military says that 2 of the homes are seeing improvements. All of the homes say they're working to be better now. But just take Eatonville in behind me here. 42 people have died inside that facility. And the military says that at times, those who were positive for COVID-19 were allowed to wander around those who were not yet infected, an obvious challenge when it comes to controlling infection. Adrian?
All right, so much more to come. David, thank you.
Now, the mission for those soldiers in Quebec and Ontario care homes is dangerous. The number of them now infected with COVID-19 has jumped to 36. That's up by 8 from less than a week ago. Of the total, 14 have been infected in Ontario homes, 22 in Quebec, and both provinces have asked for the deployment to continue. Now, federal involvement in Canada's long-term care homes may not end with the military mission, nor with this pandemic, for that matter. David Cochran shows us how this is rippling through Ottawa.
It is deeply disturbing.
This may be an Ontario scandal, but it's also a national shame.
We need to do a better job of supporting our seniors in long-term care right across the country through this pandemic and beyond. This is a situation that has gone on for a long time. We need to take action as a country.
Even though the military is deployed to homes in Quebec and Ontario, long-term care is the exclusive responsibility of the provinces. Thousands of facilities across Canada, a blend of private and public ownership. Soldiers blew the whistle on 5 homes, but the problem doesn't end there.
I don't believe it's just 5. We have to do a deep, deep dive into all the homes, and we're going to need the resources to do that. And that's why I'm asking for the federal government to help us and support us.
Federal support means federal money and lots of it to fix a system critics say is plagued by low salaries, limited training, and a hunt for profit.
Will the Prime Minister agree today that it is time to remove profit from the care of seniors?
We will not be telling the provinces what they need to do in their areas of jurisdiction, but we all know that there is a need for serious conversations within all orders of government.
Serious conversations to overcome jurisdictional and financial barriers, to fix the sector where the vast majority of Canada's COVID-related deaths have occurred.
I think Canadians expect us to be there for our elders, and we will work very closely with the provinces and territories to understand how best to do that.
The Ontario report will undoubtedly push those conversations forward, and a second jolt could be on the way. The federal government confirms the military is preparing a second report outlining its findings in 25 long-term care homes in Quebec. David Cochran, CBC News, Ottawa.
And looking at new COVID infections across the country, central Canada is still far out in front. Ontario did see a bit of a dip today, 287 new cases compared to 404 yesterday, but Quebec jumped from 573 to 614. Both figures much higher than either province wants to see. Complicating things now, an early heat wave. Toronto and Montreal saw temperatures above 30 degrees with humidity making it feel a lot hotter. Not good for vulnerable seniors and a potential challenge to physical distancing protocols at parks and in public spaces. Montreal has often struggled during intense heat waves. 66 people died during a brutal stretch in the summer of 2018. But keeping people safe with COVID-19 around? Well, Alison Northcott has the details.
This patch of shade is a small reprieve for Lise Burnett.
It's closer to 30 degrees in the apartment.
She lives in a private seniors home and has multiple sclerosis. The air conditioner in her room isn't installed yet, and cooler common areas are off limits because of COVID-19.
Usually we go in the shopping center, but they're closed too, so there's nothing really we can do.
At the long-term care home next door, more than 50 people have died from the virus. Residents still can't leave their rooms, but the owner says things are now under control, and he's confident they can deal with the added risk of the heat.
Some client, they'll need some more fresh air, so we're going to install air conditioning, portable air conditioning in their room.
But not all long-term care residents have access to air-conditioned rooms. While most public homes have cool common areas, advocates say that's not enough, particularly now that some of those spaces are closed.
This is inhumane, irrespectful. These are not animals that you put all together in a cage.
The province says it's working on solutions.
Not only for resident and vulnerable people, but also for working people that have to work in a very difficult conditions with their mask and their gloves and their blouses.
Outside the homes, the heat is complicating the COVID-19 response. This mobile testing site closed for the day over concerns staff and those waiting to be tested would overheat. With water fountains, pools, and libraries closed, community groups say vulnerable people have few options left to cool off.
As hard as it normally is to get away from the heat, right now it's nearly impossible.
The city says splash pads are gradually reopening as public health officials figure out ways to deal with a double risk, high temperatures on top of a pandemic. Alison Northcott, CBC News, Montreal.
And the heat is also presenting some major challenges in Toronto. With city-run recreational facilities offline, there are few places for people to go to just cool down, to say nothing of trying to keep their distance. Tashana Reed takes a closer look.
We just really wanted to get out, and he wanted to play in the water and get cooled off.
Nicole Etherington and her son Louie came here to get out of their small apartment. Their regular summer favorites, not an option.
We're going to really miss the water, the splash pads, and the wading pools.
City beaches are open, but public swimming pools, libraries, and shopping malls remain closed as temperatures soared into the mid-30s this week. So today, the city moved to open 6 emergency cooling centers with space for 580 people.
These 6 locations were locations that we could quickly open up. Just 2 weeks ago, it was snowing in Toronto, so things have moving very, very quickly.
At the centers, people will be asked about symptoms and their travel history. Anyone with COVID-19 symptoms will get a mask and an alternate room to cool off in. Seats are spaced out according to physical distancing guidelines. The city says more centers are on the way.
It is a challenge because a lot of facilities are closed, and so what can we do to reopen them and make them safe for people to come in?
The heat is just one more threat for vulnerable communities, including people who live outside.
Marginalized people, people who are already disadvantaged, people who are disproportionately harmed by COVID-19 are also a lot of the same people who are going to be harmed by heat waves.
Health experts say for people isolating at home in the heat, to keep blinds closed, use fans, and stay hydrated. Tashana Reed, CBC News, Toronto.
Big cities are where most of Ontario's COVID-19 cases can be found, according to data analyzed by CBC News. There are about 4,100 active cases right now in the province. Most of them are in the Greater Toronto area. And add in the cases from Ottawa, Windsor, Essex, and Hamilton, and you see that 90% are in Ontario's biggest cities and surrounding areas. Now, officials know exactly where all of those cases are, right down to the neighborhood. But as the CBC's Vic Adopia tells us, they're not sharing that information with the public.
Brampton is just one of the Toronto area communities seeing a troubling surge of new COVID cases in some neighborhoods. But which neighborhoods specifically, Ontario's premier refuses to say.
I don't want to stigmatize one certain, 10 streets, but people know where the hot spots are.
Indeed, Brampton's medical officer does, but is also staying mum.
There's a chance that some people may sort of see it as, well, that area has a lot of COVID, but we don't have COVID in my neighborhood. And that's not the message we want to be delivering. We want to be delivering that, it circulates amongst the community, it circulates with people, and there aren't necessarily, invisible walls between different neighborhoods.
The Greater Toronto area has less than half of Ontario's population, but more than 3/4 of the province's cases.
I think we need to be transparent through all of this. It's brand new, and people are dying. So we need to be transparent to try to save as many lives as possible.
Scientists have access to that location data to find out who's most testing positive for COVID-19 in the Toronto area. A disproportionate number do live in lower income neighborhoods, but the research found the main risk factors were not where they live, but their jobs and how many people they live with. Still, Taiwan and South Korea have both shared location outbreak data with the public as a means of containing the pandemic.
Maybe it's a tool we can deploy, but I would like to see it managed in a sensitive manner. Stigmatization is a real thing, and we have to handle this delicately. So simply dumping information, while I want that as a researcher, I do understand there are some larger societal concerns about it.
The Ontario government insists public health departments are already working in outbreak hotspots, increasing testing and contact tracing, critical for a province that's still falling short of its testing target. Vic Adopia, CBC News, Toronto.
Alberta's NDP opposition says the province is exploiting the pandemic for the sake of pipeline politics. That is a reference to the energy minister's recent comment that physical distancing rules will limit protests. Here's Rafi Boudjikanian with the story that spread past Canada's borders.
You ain't doing nothing about it, I will!
Very aggressive and violent.
This was the last anti-pipeline protest in Edmonton. Tense yet brief.
Guys know how to make a mess in our country.
But the province's energy minister had demonstrators on her mind last week.
There's nut bars all over the place across Canada, and those are the people, they're very much on the fringe.
Sonia Savage was discussing the Trans Mountain Pipeline on an industry podcast.
Time to be building a pipeline because you can't have protests of more than 15 people. So it's true. Let's get it built. Let's get it built.
In fact, the COVID-19 restrictions here now allow crowds of 50 to gather, but her remarks have drawn criticism in this country.
What I am surprised about was the fact that they would be so open and so blatant about making such bold comments.
And overseas. Today, Greta Thunberg sarcastically thanked the minister for her honesty.
The reality is that you don't have the luxury anymore of just speaking to one audience.
This crisis management specialist says Savage may have found sympathy with an oil and gas crowd, but should have geared her message to build bridges.
Never close doors. Open those doors to other conversations with other parts of Canada and around the world.
For now, at least, the province is unapologetic.
We will continue as a government to do everything possible to get our product to market.
Nixon says nobody's blocking anyone's right to protest. Meanwhile, the government still intends to legislate a bill that would drastically increase fines for those blocking pipelines or railways and even send them to jail. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Edmonton.
A daylight shooting in downtown Toronto left a young man dead today and sent 2 others to hospital with serious injuries. Here's Ellen Morrow with what we know so far.
There's a shoe from somebody.
From above, the remnants of a deadly shooting police say was targeted, killing a 21-year-old man and leaving a 15-year-old boy and a 27-year-old woman with serious injuries.
I saw her sitting down. At first I thought she was scared, but then she got shot on the side and it was like bleeding. Like, I don't know, it was a ricochet or like a direct shot, I can't tell.
That woman believed to be a bystander, not a target.
And because of the suspect just shooting randomly, an innocent person was caught in that crossfire.
Police say the shooter waited in a vehicle for about 40 minutes until they saw the victims. More than one person was involved, according to police, including the driver of the vehicle and the shooter, who got out on the passenger side to open fire. Police described the shooting as brazen. It happened late this afternoon around 4 p.m. in broad daylight near what is usually a very busy intersection in downtown Toronto. That intersection in the heart of Toronto's entertainment district.
Even with COVID, still a lot of people that were here. As you can see, it's a warm day, so a lot of people are out.
75 people have been killed or injured in gun crime in Toronto this year. In this shooting, police say the busy location means more evidence for investigators.
We're going to be able to solve this one, based on the location and based on the amount of evidence that we're getting at the early stages.
But that confidence may do little to settle shaken nerves in the center of Canada's biggest city. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
Police around Toronto have also pulled back the curtain on organized crime in the tow truck industry, seizing weapons that range from brass knuckles to a machine gun. John Lancaster shows how a turf war led to massive fraud that costs every driver.
Tow truck drivers shot, 4 of them fatally, vehicles torched. Today, police revealed 4 organized crime groups are wreaking havoc on the Toronto area towing scene.
Organized crime begins with an opportunity to make money and a level of greed that leads to criminality and violence. The towing industry and its lack of regulations have bred exactly that environment.
Police say they've made 20 arrests in what they call Project Platinum and seized 11 tow trucks as well as dozens of weapons. But what started as a fight for turf and towing transformed into fraud, police say, which was much more profitable.
They staged collisions using drivers they recruited. They deliberately caused collisions on roadways and in parking lots across the GTA.
The crashes involved high-end vehicles. The suspects are accused of conspiring with body shops and physiotherapists to inflate injury and insurance claims, pushing up premiums for the rest of Ontario drivers. When an insurance company hired a lawyer to investigate, his office was torched. Joey Gagne says he started to see problems about 3 years ago.
The arrest will help with the violence. I'm pretty sure it's a very tiny group of operators that have gotten escalated or elevated the violence.
Both Gagne and police agree a lack of industry oversight has led to Wild West showdowns on Toronto area highways. Unlike Quebec, Ontario's towing industry is highly unregulated. Oversight is rare. And that creates a lot of heavy lifting for police, they say.
We could be seeing an additional 30+ arrests or more.
In the meantime, they hope these latest arrests will reduce the chaos. John Lancaster, CBC News, Toronto.
A small Newfoundland community is mourning tonight after a fishing accident claimed the lives of 3 men, with a 4th still missing off the island's south coast.
We're going to keep searching with everything that we have available until we've exhausted all means that we have.
All 4 are from the close-knit town of St. Lawrence. They were reported missing after failing to return from a crab fishing trip last night. They include a father, a son, a nephew. The 4th is a close family friend.
They were family men. They were people who you could see in the community with their children and with their families participating in the various things that went on in the town. This was a severe blow to the community today.
Multiple fishing boats, along with a Coast Guard vessel and 2 aircraft, are said to be looking for the missing man.
In the U.S., race-related incidents in 2 cities have revealed new examples of an old truth, what it's like to be black in America. As Stephen D'Souza tells us, the police were directly involved in one, very indirectly in the other.
I cannot breathe. It is difficult to watch and tragically familiar. Minneapolis police say the man on the ground, George Floyd, matched the description of a suspect in a forgery case. They say he resisted arrest Monday night. After at least 8 minutes with the officer's knee on his neck, paramedics arrive. He died later in hospital.
What we saw was a black man who was lynched. They didn't use rope, he used his knee.
Today, the 4 officers involved were fired.
Being black in America should not be a death sentence.
But too often, many live with that fear. Floyd's death mirrors that of Eric Garner, who uttered those same words, "I can't breathe."
I'm going to tell them there's an African-American man threatening my life.
That painful history hung over another interaction that's gained national attention. This woman, Amy Cooper, called 911 after an African-American man asked her to leash her dog.
I'm being threatened by a man in the Ramble. Please send the cops immediately.
He says he recorded the incident to show he wasn't intimidated.
We live in an age of Ahmaud Arbery where, black men are shot, gunned down because of the presumptions that people make.
Amy Cooper, no relation, was fired from her job, had to give up her dog, and apologized.
The police, I think of them as a protection agency. And unfortunately, this has caused me to realize that there are so many people in this country that don't have that luxury.
But some experts say she should have known the potentially deadly implications of her threat.
She obviously knows that black men have a contentious relationship with the police.
In Central Park, police arrived after both parties left. No arrests or charges. Tonight, the anger over George Floyd's death boiled over. A large crowd grew at the spot of the arrest, with reports of gunfire. Police broke it up with tear gas and pepper spray. The protesters were chanting a familiar refrain, "I can't breathe." Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Toronto.
The NHL says it has a new game plan to return to the ice.
We will resume play and conduct the 2020 Stanley Cup playoffs in 2 hub cities.
Next on The National, what it means for Canadian teams vying for the Stanley Cup and the key details still missing.
Inside a restaurant getting ready to reopen. That tricky tightrope of offering a pleasant experience that's also safe.
It's really important that we don't make the environment feel like you're going into a hospital emergency room.
And Canadian hotels say they're ready, but are the guests ready to book?
I see tumbleweeds flowing through the lobby. It's quiet. It's a little eerie, I guess, to see the hotel empty like this.
We're back in 2. Welcome back. Well, there's some news for action-starved hockey fans tonight. NHL Commissioner Gary Bettman has shared new details on a return-to-play format for the rest of the season, assuming there is a rest of the season, and that is far from guaranteed. Jamie Strachan has more details and a bit of a spoiler alert. Don't book any nights off just yet.
Could hundreds of NHLers soon arrive in Vancouver to begin a truncated run at the Stanley Cup? The league insists it's possible.
We are doing this is because our fans are telling us in overwhelming numbers that they want us to complete the season, if at all possible.
Bettman today declared the regular season over, with 24 teams, including 6 from Canada, proceeding directly to a playoff round to be played in 2 hub cities without fans. Toronto, Edmonton, and Vancouver are candidates.
I'd watch anything at this point.
I don't think it's going to work. I think they should just cancel the season.
Something to do from home.
With hundreds of millions in potential lost revenue, the NHL has been floating return-to-play scenarios for weeks.
Here's maybe a chance to kind of remind everybody that the NHL is still lurking.
Concordia sports economist Moshe Lander says the league should simply cut its losses.
The risks of anything that could go wrong in terms of spreading this virus further. Why are you doing this? Just call the season. Everybody understands it. These are deep-pocketed owners.
The league says it's not rushing things. Players wouldn't begin training camp until at least July 1st.
We will not do anything until we are assured by medical professionals and the relevant government authorities that it is safe and prudent.
There are logistical questions around testing and border travel. The NHL is already balking at the practicality of using Canadian cities if the current 14-day quarantine remains in place. Jamie Strachan, CBC News, Toronto.
So the NHL is going to look awfully different when it restarts. And that's been true for just about everything that's reopened. So to help you navigate our shared new normal, a couple times a week, we'll show you what to expect. Tonight, we hit the links. As Canada reopens for business, golf is among the first recreational activities getting back underway. Why is that, and what should you expect?
It's outdoors. You can easily practice physical distancing, and there's very few high-contact surfaces that people may unintentionally contaminate themselves on.
Makes sense when you consider how wide open things are. But if you go, the first change happens before you've hit a single ball. Clubhouses and pro shops will have limited access or maybe off limits altogether.
We're asking our golfers to stay in your car 20 minutes prior to your tee time. You'll hear your name from the starter.
But once you're ready to go, 2 golden rules. The first, physical distancing. Your local course may restrict how big your group can be, also how many golfers can be on the course at any given time. The second rule, touch as few things as possible.
This will be a touchless experience. Flag sticks will be touchless. No rakes in the bunkers, and no ball washing stations.
You might even find that your golf course has adapted the hole cut so that the ball doesn't go in as far or may not go in at all. Now, on the use of pole carts or motorized golf cart, if you're using one, staff should be disinfecting them after every use. But even still, if you're touching things, don't touch your face. That's how you get sick. And on that note, if you're using a golf glove, treat this the same way you treat your hands. Wash it when you get home, but ultimately, enjoy the game and enjoy the fresh air.
Yeah, I think you can have a wonderful time outside playing golf, and this would be probably the lowest of low-risk activities for getting COVID-19.
You can also expect some changes the next time you check into a hotel in Canada. The industry says it's ready to welcome back guests safely for a stay, so we get an inside look ahead at the National.
And with many restaurants reopening across the country, boy, do you ever have questions about that, including this one here. What's the risk of a cook sneezing on your food, then you eat it, and then you get sick? The answer after this.
My name is Anna Boyes, and I'm a barista at Starbucks in Vancouver. Our stores just reopened, and that has me feeling a bit nervous. Being in any place outside of my home it's got me anxious. But that's where we are now. Life in the new normal has been bizarre. Now when I go into work and I start my shift, I have to get my temperature read. We have a digital survey that we have to answer every shift. Once you enter the store, you have to have a mask. We get a new one each shift. I did pocket one, and I'm saving it so that I can say, this is my mask from when we all had to run and hide from COVID. That's life now, is all the stories we're gonna tell in a few years.
Welcome back. Restaurants, certainly among all those things slowly reopening in parts of this country, which has led to a fair number of questions from you about that. So, joining us now to answer those questions, infectious diseases specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh. Hello to you, sir. And this first question, we've gotten an awful lot, and I've wondered about this myself. What's the risk of a cook, or a waiter for that matter, sneezing on your food, then you eat it, then you get sick?
Yeah, so certainly that might be a mode of transmission. If someone who's preparing your food or delivering your food coughs or sneezes on your food, and you put the food in your mouth, remember, you can get this infection through the respiratory route, not the gastrointestinal route, but those tracts are very, very close together when we're up here. So if that food or if that virus gets into the back of the throat and touches the right cells, you've got the right quantity of virus in the back of the throat, touching the right types of cells in your body, it can certainly get into those cells and infect you. If it gets just into your esophagus and stomach, it's not going to infect you. Your stomach acid will burn it up. But the cells in the back of your throat, if you have enough quantity of the virus in that area, yeah, you absolutely can get infected through that route.
So which is, I guess, why we'll see a lot of masks in restaurant settings. Next question for you. In all of the factors that make a restaurant safe or dangerous, how important is airflow?
You know, it's going to be a component, and certainly we know that places, for example, outdoor settings are safer than indoor settings. So if a restaurant, for example, is able to open their windows, that would make it a much safer environment. The other issue, too, is we're not supposed to pack restaurants. People should not be full to capacity or even anywhere near full to capacity. There should be at least 2 meters of distance between tables. And we should also be thinking about how people walk through the restaurants and the flow of traffic through the restaurants to really prevent people from clustering together. So airflow, physical distancing, hand hygiene, those are going to be extremely important components. And of course, if people can't practice physical distancing, then masks would be a very important addition as well.
I've got another quick one for you. Should we avoid long restaurant meals? Stick to quick dining?
You know, a lot of this is going to boil down to people's risk threshold and risk perception. Certainly, we know that the longer someone has a potential exposure, the greater the risk of getting this infection. But having said that, I mean, if you've already crossed that threshold to go out for dinner and the restaurant's taking steps to really mitigate the risk of bringing infection in and transmitting infection within the restaurant, you know, I think it's okay to enjoy a nice dinner, but certainly some people might want to spend a little bit less time if they're just less comfortable in those settings. You know, in general, the restaurant should be well designed, well ventilated, well spaced out to prevent people from getting and transmitting the infection there.
Hey, Dr. Bogosh, this has been helpful as always. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
And so, we ask your questions about COVID-19 as often as we possibly can on this program, so keep sending them in. Message us directly on Instagram at CBC The National, or send us an email at covid@cbc.ca.
Next, we'll take you inside a restaurant facing similar questions as they try to reopen.
It's really important that we don't make the environment feel like you're going into a hospital emergency room.
But how do you balance that perfect restaurant experience with strict safety? Welcome back. Restaurants in Ontario are desperately waiting for word on when they can reopen. There's been little guidance from the government on when or how that could happen. But as Nick Purdon shows us, 2 Toronto restaurant owners will be ready when it does.
We'll have everything in place, ready to go for when they give us the go-ahead to move on.
Charles Caboth is desperate to reopen. He wants his customers to come to his restaurant and forget about COVID, even for a little while. That's what this staff meeting is all about.
It's really important that we don't make the environment feel like you're going into a hospital emergency room. We're going to get rid of all these blue hospital masks that some of you guys are wearing now and create something with our logo on that's going to be much cooler.
How do you balance safety and cool? How can a restaurant do business in the age of COVID-19?
You can change the visor, so something different.
That's Danny Soberano, the other owner. He and Charles have 14 restaurants in Canada.
We're hoping for mid next month. It's important we get our employees back to work. I think they're all very anxious, also running out of money. You got to remember, we're still delivering a certain amount of appeal. So
here today, it's hard to picture the appeal Danny is talking about, of pre-COVID Cabana. Is it even possible to make a place like this safe in a pandemic?
Who's using this and what are we cleaning this with? You know, this is what TTC is using. So it's already been approved for sanitation and what we need, so that's amazing.
After every service table, when they leave, we take the table to the back and we spray them down and then bring a new table out.
Picture that, tables coming and going as they're disinfected.
We're going to put tables on the second level.
And even before you get to sit at one, staff have already screened you for COVID.
You know, when the normal was that sometimes to check people coming in to make sure that, you know, they didn't have anything that shouldn't be coming into the place. Now it'll be maybe taking your temperature to see how you are.
Maybe the biggest change here, though, will be the numbers. Instead of 4,000 people, think more like 400.
Is that sustainable? I'm not sure if it's financially sustainable. I think everybody wants to give it a try. I think everybody wants to see some smiling faces. And, you know, we'll worry about the money a little later.
Still, the changes they're making aren't free. How much money are Danny and Charles investing to reopen?
Too much. Too much. Over $200,000. Our goal is to get open, but how will we be able to get back to normality? That's the biggest question for me. That keeps me up at night.
That's the uncertainty of the pandemic. Even today, they have no idea what the rules will be for restaurants to reopen. The government hasn't said.
You guys are desperate to know what the rules are.
I think that's the most important thing is give us the rules. Right now we're going way overboard with protective acrylics and cleaning and everything else.
So there'll be plexiglass here.
So this plexiglass has already been ordered. We've already tried one of them.
So we allow you to interact with your, your neighbors, but they'll be with the plexiglass. You know, if you want to cheer a toast, you can within a foot.
Imagine that, toasting someone through plexiglass. Makes me wonder, why not just wait for a vaccine?
You can't. What gives me the time? A timeline on a vaccine. Is it 6 months? Is it a year? What about all these employees that are sitting home and some of them can't make ends meet? Just drop everything? That's not what we do. We're not quitters, we're leaders. We hope that the government realizes that the hospitality and restaurant industry is just not us. It's our suppliers, it's the guys selling us the meat, the vegetables, so you can't just quit. That's not what we do.
They'll always come out with something.
At this point during the pandemic, we all need something to get our minds off COVID. So no matter the restrictions, you have to think Charles and Danny have a chance.
Any questions, anybody? We all ready to open?
We're ready.
Tell us one.
Nick Purdon, CBC News, Toronto.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody.
Plexiglass barriers, like the ones mentioned in Nick's story, are required for some businesses to reopen. They're in huge demand right now. And as Greg Rasmussen explains, manufacturers are having some trouble keeping up.
If I can do this myself.
Add this to the duties of owning a restaurant. Plastic barrier installer.
Well, I've never really worked with plexiglass, and I did this myself yesterday.
But finding it is tough.
Nothing fancy about it. It's sort of like what we could get. Plexiglass was hard to get, so thankfully I had a guy, thanks to my guy.
After finding plastic from a friend of a friend and installing it, they reopened. But other businesses are still waiting.
And once the first hour or two went by, it was great. It felt just like the old place.
The effectiveness of barriers is still being studied, but now they're mandatory for many businesses. Getting them, though, can take weeks. This shop fabricates barriers and sells plastics.
It's been crazy. Well, people are looking for barriers, whether it's doctor's offices or dentists or grocery stores or hair salons. Everybody's looking for protection barriers for employees.
One type of business threatens to add to the backlog.
Casinos are now looking at putting a piece of plexiglass between every slot machine. And when and if that happens, it's going to take a real strain on the supply chain.
This is unprecedented demand levels here, so the industry has to respond very quickly, but they're trying to get that additional capacity into production, but then it's got to ship, and that's going to take time.
Starting to open up again. And
some customers are already adjusting to life behind plastic.
Can't even see it, I think it's well done.
While others hope it's only temporary.
Definitely want to go back to normal, and I wouldn't mind seeing the plexiglass going down for sure.
Greg Rasmussen, CBC News, Vancouver.
Now, those plexiglass barriers are also being installed in hotels, getting ready to welcome back guests.
I see tumbleweeds flowing through the lobby.
Next on The National, we get an inside look at what your next stay could look like. Welcome back. The hotel industry has been hammered by COVID-19, but as some prepare to reopen, Hannah Thibodeau shows us what guests can expect.
It's like a ghost town in this nearly 300-room hotel.
I see tumbleweeds flowing through the lobby. It's quiet. It's a little eerie, I guess, to see the hotel empty like this.
Before the pandemic, Brook Street Hotel employed 340 staff. It's down to 19 as it prepares to reopen. Another change is enhanced cleaning and safety protocols.
People want to know that wherever they go in the building, it's clean, sanitized, and we've put the proper measures in place to take care of that.
That includes plexiglass at the front desk, social distancing markers on the ground, and sanitation stations. And rooms will be cleaned just once per usage to limit possible exposure for housekeeping. Some hard-to-clean items like pens and papers will be removed. The limited interaction begins at the door.
It will allow a guest to check in over their devices via email. They'll have their keys sent to them in advance. They touch their lock and they can go directly into their room.
We have increased the frequency with which we clean.
The Novotel in Toronto will use UV lights and electrostatic sprayers for disinfectant, and even bed lifts to help clean underneath. The Hotel Association of Canada says 250,000 hotel employees right across the country have been laid off because of the pandemic, and it expects to be one of the last industries to fully recover.
It will take a while before conventions can come back, even weddings that would normally take place in a hotel. So I think we're a long ways away from mass gatherings in hotel facilities, and that is going to have a large impact on our overall business.
So far, Brook Street has just a handful of reservations for June, but it and other hotels are hoping to see more bookings this summer from guests desperate to get out of the house. Hannah Thibodeau, CBC News, Ottawa.
Next on The National, how to fight quarantine boredom as the weather gets great. These guys have quite the summer social distancing plan. Our moment is next. Well, look at these happy fellows. These two neighbors got a little creative with their summer social distancing. Still can't say that word. Down came the fence and up went the bar. So their neighborly solution to quarantine boredom has to be our moment.
We've always joked about that we hang out so much that we should just get rid of the fence and just like have one big yard for the kids to play in. And I think with COVID, obviously kind of sped the process up a bit.
It was literally a last minute kind of idea project for a Sunday afternoon. Actual whole section of fence came right out. Might look elaborate. It's really not. It's chains and latches and some power tools, and that's really all it took to put it together. We have measured that
if we were like on our stool, we would actually be 6 feet apart. It's good. And I mean, this is going to be here for a long time for us to enjoy.
Yeah.
Okay, so my first thought is I'm not sure this would work with every neighbor, but these two guys like each other so much, their families do, that they got trailers side by side so that they could vacation together.
Oh, that's nice. Did you see the ceiling, the umbrella on top? That's amazing. So, but see, my idea, I think they should do it with 4 backyards, like 2 backyards, you know, that back out onto 2 more. I don't know what that would look like, but someone smarter than me can design that. That's the National for this May 26th. Have a good night.
Good night.